I reject the idea that it's a cult. I reject the idea that...
You reject the idea that the GOP is a cult?
Yes. I reject the idea. I think it's all about the two-party game, and it's all zero-sum, and they want to win, and that is the only goal in two-party politics is to win.
Then they wouldn't nominate Donald Trump.
This exchange between Mehdi Hasan and Chris Cuomo was recorded back in 2024, before the election, when Joe Biden was still in office and the debate over Donald Trump's intentions was still raging. At the center of the conversation was a simple but serious question. Is Trump simply exaggerating for political effect, or are his critics right to warn about authoritarian tendencies? What makes this discussion interesting now is that both men make predictions about what a future Trump presidency could look like. So looking back today, the real question becomes, who read the moment correctly? If you believe protecting democracy and accountability matters, make sure to subscribe and join the conversation. Let's get into it.
One of the sticks I've been beaten with recently is that I underestimate dangerously the dangerousness of Donald Trump. My suggestion is pretty simple. I'm not going to argue that he doesn't say what he says. I'm going to argue that it doesn't mean what it would if you said it. Because this man is a lie machine, and a hyperbole machine. And you have to look at it that way, that the idea that he's a man of great vision and strategy who wants to become an autocrat and is going to put people around him who can help him overthrow America's democracy, I think is a laughably absurd notion. And the more the left insists on it, the more it makes people think who are in the center, right, that small group, that you guys are exaggerating the problem because you don't have better ideas.
So a couple of things. I'll engage in the substance of what you said in a moment, but let me just question your premise that this is a left critique. I know, Chris, I get it where you're coming from. You have this kind of stick, like you're in the center, there's a right and there's a left, and you're above the fray. That first of all, that's not true. But where does this left come from? Some of the most eloquent, passionate, and most informed critics of Donald Trump's fascism and assault on democracy are not leftists.
It's true.
Judge Michael Luttig is not a leftist. Liz Cheney, last time I checked, is not a leftist.
True.
George Conway is not a leftist.
True.
All of the former Trump administration officials who've said the man's crazy, he's an authoritarian.
General John Kelly.
Leftists, right? So they're not leftists. I don't accept the premise that this is a leftist critique, not at all. In fact, there are people on the left who attack people like me and say you're being hyperbolic and agree with the premise of your statement. So it's not a left thing. Let's just put that to one side. In terms of the substance, number one, let me snarkily say this. Chris, did you think Donald Trump would incite an insurrection and refuse to leave office in 2019, in 2020?
No, but I also wouldn't characterize the behavior the way you did.
You don't think he incited an insurrection?
No, I don't think it was an insurrection. I think it was a riot.
Okay, did you? Okay, I don't agree with that for a second, but let's park that for a moment. Did you in 2019 or 2020 say Donald Trump will refuse to leave office and incite a riot and an attack on the Capitol?
No.
I did. In 2019, I wrote a piece for The Intercept saying Donald Trump is very clear about the fact he won't accept the election result and he won't leave, and people are ignoring this danger. And if this, you know what's going to happen? Violence and rioting. I wrote this in The Intercept in, I think, May of 2019, about 18 months before the election. People said to me, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a brick. You don't understand American politics. The Secret Service will walk him out. There's no danger here. This is all hyperbole. So my first point, Chris, is forgive me when I hear people say it's hyperbole. I was right then and they were wrong. So maybe we should have a little bit of humility from the folks who say, calm down. A lot of the calm down folks were completely wrong on January the 6th, 2021. That's my first point. And then in terms of the substance, I mean, he is saying this stuff. I agree with you, Chris. He's a liar. He's an exaggerator. I completely agree. He's not a strategist. I don't think you need to be a strategist to be an autocrat, right? I don't think you need that. I think you have autocratic tendencies and instincts, and then it's an issue of whether those around you and the institutions...
They usually have a plan, Mehdi, as we both know.
Well, he's got people around him. Have you read the Heritage Foundation 2025 report? It's a pretty clear plan for authoritarianism. Pretty well laid out over multiple pages. But just go back to Trump. Okay, when I say... So a friend of mine said recently, a friend of mine who doesn't want to vote for Biden because of Gaza. So I can't vote for Biden. I said, well, what happens when Trump's president? And they said, well, we'll protest Trump just like we protested him the first time.
But how do you vote for Trump if you don't like Biden's position on
No, they didn't say they would vote for Trump. They said, well, we'll vote for Biden, but they don't care if Trump wins. They're so mad at Biden.
I got you.
They don't care if Trump wins. And I said, well, what are you going to do once Trump's president? You're Muslim, you're going to suffer. We'll protest. We protested the first time. I said, what happens when he puts the military on the streets and they open fire on protesters? Oh, Mehdi, you're being exaggerating. That's too far. Mark Esper, Chris, a man you know better than I do, just went on MSNBC last week and said, he told me to shoot protesters. I said, we can't do it. Mark Esper won't be there next time. Next time it'll be Kash Patel or General Michael Flynn who'll say, sure, boss, whatever you want. So when you tell me like it's hyperbole exaggeration, it's not. He's already said it. He already gave the order to shoot people. We just got lucky first time around that there were a few half-spined conservatives in his administration who said no. They won't be there next time, Chris. It'll be Michael Davis. It'll be Michael Flynn. It'll be Kash Patel. It'll be Sebastian Gorka, who will love it.
So you really believe if Donald Trump wins again, there's all kinds of mayhem, and he is doing everything he can, not just to settle scores, but to turn himself as closely as he can into Putin?
Yes. Why would I?
This is where the timing of this conversation really matters. Remember, this debate between Mehdi Hasan and Chris Cuomo happened in May of 2024, months before the election. At the time, Cuomo was clearly treating Hasan's warnings as a bit exaggerated, almost like he was being overly alarmist about Donald Trump and the direction a second Trump presidency might take. But looking back now, a lot of what Hasan warned about doesn't seem exaggerated at all. In fact, several of his points look remarkably accurate. Hasan specifically talked about the kind of people who could end up surrounding Donald Trump in a second administration. Names like Kash Patel were mentioned as examples of the hardline loyalists who might gain influence. At the time, Cuomo seemed skeptical that Trump would really be surrounded by that type of ideological circle. But that prediction now feels a lot less far-fetched, because the pattern around Trump has often been clear. Loyalty tends to matter more than traditional experience or institutional restraint. Then there's the bigger issue Hasan raised, the role of organizations like the Heritage Foundation, particularly the policy agenda connected to Project 2025. Hasan argued that these groups already had detailed plans for reshaping the federal government and expanding presidential power. Back then, some commentators treated those plans as just think tank proposals. But analysts have pointed out that parts of that agenda, even if only a small percentage so far, have already started appearing in real policy discussions and actions. And that's the deeper point Hasan was making. Authoritarian shifts rarely arrive all at once. They usually begin with personnel choices, policy frameworks, and institutional pressure that gradually reshape how power works. That's why revisiting this exchange between Mehdi Hasan and Chris Cuomo is so revealing today. What once sounded like a debate about hypotheticals now looks more like a disagreement about how seriously to take the warning signs. And with hindsight, that difference in perspective stands out a lot more clearly.
I not believe that. Every bit of evidence we have, public and private, suggests that is his plan.
Because the institutions are too strong, and the rest of because the institutions are too strong, and because the
institutions are a joke
branches
in
of
this
government
country.
are too strong.
Which institutions? Is this the Supreme Court that's now running down the clock on his behalf so that he never faces a single federal trial before the next election, which in any other country would be laughed at? Chris, let me just bring you the immigrant perspective here. The rest of the world thinks we are a joke when it comes to our institutions. In Brazil, Bolsonaro didn't incite an insurrection. He simply questioned the results. The Brazilian judges banned him from running for president again until 2030. We have judges in this country who, by the way, are appointed by the president. Absurd system. No other country does it this way. They have independent judges, not party-nominated judges. Our judges, 3 of whom were appointed by Trump, are now running down the clock on his behalf, this ludicrous decision to hear his immunity case at their own slow pace. So no, I don't believe the institution is strong enough. I believe we dodged it in January of 2021 by the skin of our teeth, by people like Raffensperger happening to be in the right place at the right time, by the Supreme Court in that moment realizing that none of the 60 cases, including the Pennsylvania case, were worth hearing. Next time around, it's a different ballgame. You've seen the Republican Party, what they've been up to in recent years. They've purged any of those folks from 2020. Raffensperger, thankfully, did just get reelected in Georgia. They weren't able to get rid of him. But in other places in Michigan, they've carried out purges. And this time round, yeah, they're much better to take on our institutions. Which institution? The House? Chris, the Republican Party in Congress is a Trump party. You know this.
Mm-hmm. It has been to date. There are different ways to look at it. It's certainly as a matter of degree. How so? Well, when you listen to General Kelly, now, do I wish he had been saying these things while he was chief of staff? Absolutely. But even with a pretty weak, Esper, I would put at the stronger scale of this, although he made the decision to work for Trump. He had that good explanation of, I knew this guy was going to have to need good people around him because, all right, I'll give it to him. But that could break either way. Out of conscience, you could also say, no, I won't work with this guy. And let me tell you why. But that with a pretty weak lineup around him, there was a lot of pushback. And the theory from even John Kelly is the stronger people are around him. If you had regular people who were around other White Houses that he had interfaced with, they would have been a much bigger check. So even with these weak people were telling him no all the time. And he listened to them because as long as it's good for him somehow at the end of the day, he goes along with it. He doesn't have what most people who want you to shoot at protesters have in their heads about why. And that for him, it's really that he wants to win. He wants to stall these lawsuits. And
Agreed.
It's basically the end of it.
Here's where we agree, is that the one saving grace we have with Trump as the autocrat in waiting is that he doesn't have an underlying ideology of any kind. He's not Orban, Putin, Erdogan, MBS, Modi in that shape or form. He wants to be liked. Right? He wants to save his ass right now, right? In terms of the legal
and
situation.
Be liked. He wants to be liked, Mehdi. If you were to go on TV tonight and say,
he's not running a campaign that implies he wants to be liked at all. He's running a base campaign. He wants to be liked by his base. He's given up on any kind of. In 2016, he was reaching out to independents, trying to pretend to be anti-establishment candidate workers. Not now. But he's not even trying.
But Mehdi, he has a pathology involved in his behavior. Yes. I can use that word with you that most politicians don't. He is an actual amoral agent. As somebody who has studied philosophy for 35 years of my life. He's also
a malignant narcissist. And you mentioned pathology, Chris. Here's another, sorry to do another kind of I told you so moment. Back in 2018-19, Dr. Bandy Lee of Yale put out a book called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. A bunch of psychiatrists analyzed it from different angles. I pushed that book heavily. I had her on my podcast at The Intercept. I went and spoke at a conference she organized. People said to me, this is crazy. This is a left gone over the cliff, like trying to psychoanalyze the president. This violates all sorts of medical rules. Guess what? John Kelly, who you just mentioned, he bought the book. The guy in the White House who was chief of staff was using the book as a guide to his boss.
Look, I do think it's weird for clinicians to want to analyze somebody that they haven't met.
It is weird, but it's a unique, we live in a case of lots of unprecedented moments thanks to Trump.
And he's a pretty obvious narcissist.
On the yes men and the no men.
Yes.
I'm not denying that there were people who said no around it. They didn't say no enough, like you just pointed out. They didn't resign and say their piece at the time. And by the way, even with those adults in the room, he still almost started a nuclear war with North Korea. He still almost started a war with Iran. He still kidnapped children at the border. He still praised neo-Nazis in Charlottesville. He still allowed 500,000 Americans to die who probably many of them didn't need to die from COVID. So even with that, he was a disastrous, perhaps the most disastrous president of our in modern American history. I'm saying next time around, Chris, there aren't going to be those people. He is coming back with vengeance. 4 years is a long time. He's not the same Trump as term one. He is going to come back much angrier, much more organized, and surrounded by way more yes men and open fascists like the Bannons of this world than he did last time around. I'll give you an example, Chris, just one example. Mike Davis, who Don Jr. is touting as future AG or future senior figure in the administration, conservative lawyer, used to be a Bush guy, gone full MAGA. This guy is on Twitter saying, I'm going to deport Mehdi Hasan to Guantanamo Bay, right? Now, he doesn't have the power to do that even as Attorney General. But those are the kind of people that he and his people want to bring into the administration. It is not Jeff Sessions. As bad as Jeff Sessions was, he was still a conventional conservative.
I understand the concern. I don't believe it. And now you could say, well, you're being delusional. I don't think so. I just think that I'm being swayed by my very long time knowledge of him.
So what do you think is going to happen, Chris? I've laid out my vision. What do you think is going to happen from 24?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure
onwards, he's president.
I'm not sure that he wins.
No, let's assume he wins.
All right. So if he wins, One, does the left create any dynamic like the one we had after the last election? I don't know. Not that it would be baseless, but is Donald Trump, are the people around him capable of rigging? 100%. They're capable of it. So what if we get real proof that he rigged the election and that's why he won? I think he's much more likely to rig an election than it is likely that it would be rigged against him. So
Agreed.
I got to see what happens with that. Then if he wins, I believe that that is so much of what the satisfaction was for him that he may coast from silly media fight to media fight, and he will do a lot of saber rattling against us. I think that will be his main focus because the Democrats will all fall in line like every out party does.
Unfortunately. What do you think? So 2 questions. What do you think happens to all these freaks around him? The heritage folks, the ideologues, the Bannon. Do you think they just?
He has.
You don't think they have? You don't think they have real clear plans on the social liberal culture wars front?
He is not a heritage front? He's not a Heritage Foundation guy.
But they're the ones who are going to be. They're the ones pushing.
They are pushing
whatever kind of agenda
things.
you want to call.
They were very effective with the
civil
judges.
servants.
Yes, deep state stuff, as they call it, which I don't believe in. By the way, bureaucracies definitely have their entrenched issues, but I don't believe in what is called deep state. I believe it's a false negative.
But it's projection, right, Chris? They want it to be a deep state that they can then weaponize. The stuff they say about Biden runs the FBI, Biden has nothing to do with the FBI. That's what Trump wants. We know that. You and I both know he would love to have an FBI.
Right. I think that's a little bit too clever for them. I think that
This conversation between Mehdi Hasan and Chris Cuomo, recorded in May of 2024, runs over an hour. But even just in the key exchanges, one thing becomes painfully obvious. Hasan was right far more often than Cuomo. Cuomo underestimated Trump at nearly every turn. He didn't think Trump could win a second term. He claimed Trump wasn't a Heritage Foundation guy, while Hasan accurately predicted that the Heritage Foundation would play a central role in shaping policy and staffing in the administration. Cuomo assumed Trump might coast, that he would be distracted by media battles or rely on past strategies. But we've already seen that's not the case. Trump has been highly active, engaging in public spats with the media, late-night hosts like Jimmy Kimmel and Saturday Night Live, and relentlessly pushing an agenda through aggressive moves, military show of force in cities, ICE raids, controversial detention policies, and even steps tied to government shutdowns. And here's where the real warning signs were. Institutions were supposed to act as a safeguard. Cuomo seemed to think they would automatically protect the country from overreach. Hasan, however, warned that our institutions were weak, sometimes even a joke in their inability to act decisively. And what we've witnessed since confirms that concern. The lower courts, not the Supreme Court, were the only real breaks in January 2021, and even then, it was narrow. The media largely rolled over, corporate America followed suit, and many Democrats, politically cautious and unprepared, have been largely feckless in resisting authoritarian tendencies. This exposes a stark reality. When an administration ignores laws and courts, or sees them as optional, democracy depends not just on the existence of institutions, but on their strength, independence, and willingness to act. And too often, those safeguards are not enough if the political will falters. Hasan also got the personnel dynamics right. Figures like Kash Patel, Michael Flynn, and other loyalists are gaining influence in ways Cuomo suggested wouldn't happen. That's a reminder that authoritarianism often creeps in through appointments, advisors, and loyalists who bypass norms rather than any single legislative act. The warnings weren't abstract. They were concrete, specific, and, with hindsight, chillingly accurate. And it doesn't stop there. From efforts to reshape federal agencies through the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 agenda, to ICE's increasingly aggressive enforcement, to public displays of power in cities, all of it demonstrates a systematic approach to centralizing authority and undermining institutional independence. These are the things Hasan was pointing to when Cuomo waved off his concerns. So what does this teach us? It's not about partisan scorekeeping. Democracy isn't self-correcting. It depends on active citizens, independent institutions, and leaders who uphold norms rather than exploit loopholes. When those checks fail, as Hasan warned, the consequences are real and already unfolding. Looking back, Hasan wasn't exaggerating. His assessment of power, loyalty, and systemic risk was clear-eyed, while Cuomo underestimated the scale, coordination, and ideological commitment of this movement. That difference matters. It shows what happens when warnings are ignored or institutions are assumed to always save the day. We see it now. Heritage Foundation influence, aggressive enforcement, media battles, and political maneuvering all confirm Hasan's trajectory. Democracy doesn't survive on hindsight alone. It survives on awareness, accountability, and action. So reflect. What safeguards still exist? What role do you, the citizen, and other stakeholders play in holding power accountable? Hasan's warnings were prescient, a call to recognize that democracy is fragile and requires constant attention. If you followed this series, don't just watch. Engage, discuss, challenge. Protect the institutions that keep power in check. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe to stay informed as these moments continue to unfold. Understanding the dangers is only the first step. Action is what protects our democracy.